But for now, let's talk about this one. We've got Devon Singh with a really interesting offensive team and some wonderful accomplishments as well. World Cup of VGC top 8 last year, so a returning member of this team. Dallas Regionals top 16, International Challenge May 5th place. Those online tournaments performing well is really impressive. And a 6-3 performance at the most recent Pittsburgh Regional.
Yeah, all very, very good matchups across the board there in terms of those placings, and especially those international challenges where those are like the best of one, against everyone in the world sort of standings. It's nice to see someone falling out really, really high placed in that, even though it was back in 2019, still nothing to waggle about. But of course, we have over on the other side of our screen, we do have the team they will be bringing, and this is one I've entertained myself. I'm really, really enjoying it, and that is one of these cores that incorporates Landorus Incarnate alongside Landorus Tornadus Incarnate, and just throws damage down, as much as it possibly can, just stopping your opponent from getting damage down. And I'm quite fond of the Arcanine on this team because it runs that ever so uncommon attack in Head Smash, which just like Rock Slide can miss, but also does even more damage to the selected target in comparison.
The amount of damage on Head Smash is just terrifying. It's like 2 Rock Slides and then a little bit more. I would not want to take a Head Smash from an Arcanine. And I think there's a really interesting balance here of like the offensive options that Devon has in the Landorus and the Arcanine, and the speed control to be able to build that up, and the sort of like ways that Devon can build to larger levels of offense on more defensive Pokemon. Like he's got the Grassy Surge and the leftovers on Goldenko to allow it to go for nasty plods and set up more offense later down the road in times where he can't just start off hitting hard. He can also hit harder. There's just a lot of options from Devon's side of the field, and I think it's a tall order for anyone facing him to be able to break through all of these different options that he has.
It is going to be a very, very tall order to break through them. Of course, as we saw in the previous game of the Taiwan versus Argentina, you can have these super strong Pokemon, but it doesn't mean they're going to be super bulky. Of course, in these types of teams, you don't want any bulk because you want to make sure you're putting as much of your EVs, your abilities, your items, your natures, everything into making sure damage is being thrown down onto your opponent. And albeit sometimes you want your Pokemon to be knocked out because that is your defense. It's like, okay, my best offense is a defense, my best defense is an offense. You still have to have that fear that if someone's running a slightly bulkier team that's also quite strong, which we'll be seeing in a second from Davide, it is going to really fall back because it's just super pressuring, like comparing fragility to longevity. Of course, looking at that, we do see this very more balanced composition coming out from David's side.
A balanced composition, as you alluded to, with that bulk, as well as a player who's just like phenomenally impressive at playing balance specifically. Just to read through some of the many accomplishments that this wonderful player has, Davide has Turn Special Event Champion in 2023, a Players Cup 1 third place in 2020, and 2 separate finalist positions at the Oceania International Championships and the European International Championships, and playing to a team that I think very much aligns with Davide Cognetta's sensibilities, with the Ogerpon and the Heatran. Well, just like a lot of bulk on this side of the field.
There is a lot of bulk, and this is Pokemon which can be super bulky, but at the same time can be super offensive. Like we have the Iron Hands, where you can put all of your EVs into a defensive stat, but it still has a whopping physical attack stat. Heatran as well, the same thing. It has a really nice special attack stat, but at the same time has the bulk that's just enough to be very pressuring if you haven't got something one of those 4 times effective ground type moves into it. Landorus just helps that go even further. Strong Pokemon with strong ability, and Roaring Moon carrying Breaking Swipe as well just makes these Pokemon even bulkier, and itself is really strong. So Davide is picking out all these different things where it's like, here's these strong Pokemon. They may be strong, but they have something supportive going with them. Then that Fluttermane, which is known to be one of those really powerful Pokemon, it still has Perish Song as that very minuscule backup option if you need to trap something in, or have that like in a situation where you're going to be getting those knockouts.
Yeah, there's a certain depth of option that comes from some of those more unique move choices like the Perish Song, and with having this much bulk on Pokemon that are also still really powerful in terms of damage. And I think that's something that's really scary for a player like Davide to be able to leverage. there's just so much potential to position into really strong situations at any particular point, with a lot of like the defensive prowess needed for switching more, with a lot of options to go for like Perish Song install or a lot of damage. And so I'm pretty interested to see what answers Devon is going to be able to find for being able to handle all of this flexibility from Davide's side of the field as we step into this first game.
Yeah, we'll see what comes up in this first game because the matchup is ready to go. I myself am rooting for the hyper-offensive team, always been a hyper-offensive player, but I will not show any bias whatsoever as we see the Ogerpon next to the Fluttermane and the double Genie lead coming out straight away. And with this new moves they introduced for all the Genies, the Bleak Wind Storm, the Sandsear Storm, and the Wildbot Storm, all can become 100% accurate in Rain. And with Tornadus having Rain in its arsenal, you can quite easily say both of these Pokemon could be hit by a Sandsear Storm. The only unfortunate drawback is Landorus does lose the second effect of those attacks, which can sometimes be very, very nice, especially into physical attackers like this Ogerpon.
Yeah, I think that losing the secondary effects is a bit of a challenge, but this Landorus is in phenomenal position to be able to start throwing out some damage with those Sludge Bombs and with those Sandsear Storms. The big challenge is that I think Ogerpon is one of the key defensive cornerstones that Davide has in this matchup. I think being able to set up that special defense boost from the Terastallization gives a lot of options. Although we are just seeing the Terastallization on Landorus and not on that Ogerpon, as it looks like Landorus is setting up for some powerful Sludge Bombs.
It is setting up those Sludge Bombs, as we do see that Terastallization is foregone for a Spiky Shield, meaning that if there was an attack into that slot, it isn't going to be hit as hard as you think. But if we do see something about like a Sandsear Storm, it's hitting to both slots regardless, and it's going to throw a lot of damage down because we see how much that does to Fluttermane even with a massive special defense stat. The Shadow Ball coming out as well, reading quite handily into that Terastallization. Still going to get a knockout, but still puts it quite low.
One of those interesting effects that, even with the prediction, the Terastallization really limited Davide's options there. If the Landorus hadn't Terastallized, that Fluttermane could have maybe gone for something like a Terra Fairy Moonblast and finished off the Landorus, but that's definitely not an option, even with a Shadow Ball that's like perfect neutral damage into that Landorus. It's just a little bit weaker than Moonblast. And being able to make sure that Devon's able to get off as much attacks as possible with Landorus definitely helps him out a lot in this match. I think it gives him a lot of options for damage into both the Pokemon that Davide has on the field and most of the Pokemon in the back, honestly. I think this Landorus is a really core component of the offense that Devon has in this matchup.
It is really cool. It is going to be very pressuring. Like, Landorus is one of those Pokemon where, because it is so infrequent, it comes up in these like little pockets. It has its own little surge, and given we're in a meta where Hyper Offense is just running rampant, it's really here and it's happy to stay, especially when Rain is one of the most powerful teams right now. You can either have your own Rain and it'll do something, or you can face into your opponent's Rain and then you'll still be hitting quite hard. Of course, talking about hitting hard, we are seeing Ogerpon going for that Terastallization, getting a special defense boost, and getting that massive boost to its attacking moves through the water type buff. Sludge Bomb goes into it, still does about 50%, which is very nice to see. As you see, a Bleak Wind Storm goes through, doesn't get any knockouts from there, but has that pressure of any stat drop, but it does not happen. His Ivy Cudgel is going to do what it does best and just bonk the Pokemon on the head, and not actually get knocked out this time.
One of the really scary things about this double Genie lead is just the amount of bulk that these Pokemon can have while threatening so much offense with their powerful attacks. And I think Davide's been able to get off 2 really solid hits, but they haven't done anything to reduce the number of options on Devon's side of the field. The Pokemon at 60 or 50 hit points can do just as much damage as a Pokemon at full hit points. And in the meantime, Davide, even with all of his defensive options, is taking so much damage. The Terra Poison Sludge Bomb, that might just get a knockout on the Ogerpon the second turn, although it's going into Landorus actually, and still was almost enough for a KO, and will be with the Bleak Wind Storm. Wow.
It's enough for that KO, but Ogerpon hanging on is going to be very scary for this situation because it can just have its free pick of boot Ivy Cudgels into, allowing for... it allows for Devon to get something in from the back, which is very good in Hyper Offense, because these two Pokemon have done their job. You got a couple knockouts, you got your Tailwind up. They can happily and dandily drop out into the back here. And given who comes in, that could change things up completely. With Urshifu being there, you can actually bring it in quite safely, because there is no more water absorb on the on the Ogerpon here, which means you can go for those water type attacks and not have to worry anything about Follow Me stopping you in your tracks.
Really difficult position for Davide to have the Urshifu out on the field on this last turn of Tailwind. There's just so many options from that Urshifu. Sure, Davide can fake out the Urshifu, but if he does that, then the Tornadus has the option to just go for another Bleak Windstorm and finish off the Ogerpon. It's really feeling like Davide's options are a little bit limited, except for the fact that this Iron Hand's at full health and in a good position to do a lot of damage to any of the Pokemon that Devon has on the field, especially now that the Landorus is put down. So it took a lot of work for Davide to get to this point, but he does have some Pokemon that can really make use of the position that he's in.
Does have that, and he's going to have to try and work with those tools as much as possible, as we do see that Ogerpon is going to switch out and bring on in that Fluttermane again, who this low enough HP is going to want to take attacks from anything, bar maybe calling the switch in, going for those fighting type attacks into the Ogerpon slot. But a double protect there just to keep things safe on that inevitable fake out, meaning that there is going to be another turn to work around. And with Tailwind dwindling, you got to think, okay, oh no, there's going to be no Tailwind here. But then with the Prankster ability, that's going to go straight back up again. And with the two Pokemon sat in front of this Urshifu, it is happily going to hit into either of them. Iron Hands will take it a lot better. Fluttermane, though, maybe not going to want to take that too hard. If you switch into that slot with the Ogerpon, it is going to be at such low HP that you're probably going to see a knockout there regardless.
There are a few things scarier than having a Tornadus be able to get off a second Tailwind with another really scary attacker, and that's exactly what Devon's done to play into this position. I think, as you were talking about, the Iron Hands just has a lot of pressure here, and that gives a lot of options. I'm not sure how Devon's going to be able to break through it in the end, as we do see Surging Strikes is able to finish off that Fluttermane, but at what cost?
At what cost? Completely. You have to see what is the ability to bring on through. Wild Charge comes on out and is going to not knock out the Urshifu, allow it to stay around for another turn, which is petrifying given the sheer pressure it puts out into these sorts of late games of Pokemon are either fragile or low enough HP that they can be dealt with.
I think that totally flips the rest of this match. You were talking earlier about how often the offense on a team like Devon's comes at the cost of some defensive prowess, but it seems like Devon's found a nice balance there, that this Urshifu is able to pressure as much damage as it does, while still being able to survive attacks from the Iron Hands. As we see the Bleak Windstorm finish off that Ogerpon, and this Urshifu get a free attack into those Iron Hands, it almost doesn't matter what Devon has in the back to finish off this Iron Hands. Anything will do, and it seems like he's really just played this position strong enough with the training of his Pokemon to be able to finish off this game shortly, if not specifically this turn, then in the next one shortly.
No matter what happens, it is going to be coming down to a close. Iron Hands on this low HP, even the Drain Punch is going to take up a sliver. But the Pokemon in the back for Devon is just going to be able to say, you know what? I can do damage. A sneeze will get this Iron Hands right now. You have the case of the Bleakman could miss, but with Rillaboom coming in as well with Fake Out in his arsenal, you can just say, okay, Fake Out Bleak Windstorm, and if Bleak Windstorm misses, then you have a Grassy Cloud coming into that next turn after Fake Out, and that should be curtains for that game one. With Hyper Defense showing what it does best and getting those knockouts, as well as Davide though showing that Balance has all these ways to just switch in, switch out, and have a tool for everything. Just sometimes if your team that we're facing into is super strong, those tools aren't really going to be the best tools if they're going to be knocked out, put so low that they can't really do what they intended to do in the turn follow.
Yeah, I think you talked a lot about the Landorus earlier as we were going through the teams, and I think that really was like the crux of this, the fact that Davide wasn't able to balance this team. I think balanced teams are really predicated on knowing what kinds of attacks you're facing down, and it felt like the Terra Poison, Sheer Force, Life Orb boosted Sludge Bomb from that Landorus was just not easy for Davide to be able to handle with the Pokemon he brought. Like, his main answer to that would be the Heatran, and you do not want to bring Heatran into a Pokemon that has a lot of powerful ground type attacks. And so I think that the onus is really on Davide to be able to come up with an answer for that going forwards.
It is going to correct that answer. And you mentioned about the Heatran as well. So I just had a quick check at our data sheet there, and even if there was that terrestrialization, you still have those poison type moves being thrown down onto you, and that's one of those powerful things about Landorus right now, where it was a powerful Pokemon in the past, like in like a lot of these formats prior. But now that it's got access to Terastallization, so it can run a lot more coverage moves and still have a lot of strength coming out of it, it's just so strong. And I was gonna say during the game that like Poison Terror on Landorus is so good because it's defensive terror for Flutter mains, but also a very good offensive terror for Sludge Bomb coming in the back of everything. We'll have to see if these terrors do play a part in this next game, so I do believe game 2 is ready for us to go into. It's going to be nice to see how our players adapt to this. Will the leads change? Will the Terastallization choices change? As we see Landorus plus Flutter main coming out, and then 2 physical attackers coming out in front of that. Landorus in the Urshifu plus Rillaboom, which is going to be very annoying because you think, you know, I'm going to call that matchup, I'm going to get these physical attackers out, but unfortunately Intimidate says no. The Urshifu will break through that if it does go for Surging Strikes, getting that guaranteed critical hit each time.
I really like the adjustment by Davide to lead the Landorus. I think it covered the Landorus on the opposing side fairly well, because if that Terastallization goes off, that Landorus becomes vulnerable to ground type attacks. And the Landorus on Davide's side of the field is one of the only ones that can handle that poison ground offense. It also works really well here in intimidating that Rillaboom. But the big thing that Davide is going to have to find an answer to is that Urshifu. He has pressure with the Flutter main, but the Urshifu does have Terastallization options and Aqua Jet and Grassy Glide, and there's a lot that this Flutter main does have to worry about a little bit. But I think it's a nice balance that Davide's found for having a good threat from these 2 Pokemon.
It is a very good balance, and with able to switch out into that Ogerpon, again, showing what balance teams do best, where every time they have something to switch into, they can switch. Of course, we have to see how much pressure comes out. Here's that U-turn, does loads of damage to that Rillaboom. It was a critical hit, which is really annoying, because now you have the Landorus that can come back, or it intimidates, and you can see what happens to it. This Ogerpon is doing less damage, especially when this is one of those Assault Vest bulkier variants of Rillaboom who aren't inclined to go for as much offensive presence as possible. Still doing a really good chunk, about 50% to that Ogerpon.
A really interesting just sort of pivot here to be able to get that Flutter main in now next to a Pokemon with Follow Me. I really like that adjustment to just sort of make sure one of Davide's main offensive options is this Flutter main, and it feels like it now has probably the safest Dazzling Gleam in the world here. I don't see that there's a lot of counterplay from Devon to that particular approach, and I think it's just really speaking to the prowess of defensive options that Davide has. I think Devon did a good job of adjusting and recognizing that Landorus might not work as well the second time as the first, but I think it's tough to figure out how to get the right attacks into the right slots with the amount of different switching options Davide has.
It is going to come down to where those options are, and I think now that Davide has kind of pinned Devon in a really awkward situation where you can switch out as many times as you want, but now there's that Flutter main that's at max HP and can be faster than most of these Pokemon, as well as Landorus can come back in at any time, and you don't really want to be switching out in front of a Flutter main because it is going to have a super strong move that will hit you regardless. As we see there, the combination of the Intimidates allows the Rillaboom to do no damage to this Ogerpon, and then the Horn Leech comes in and just gets that HP back straight away after the knockout comes out from that Dazzling Gleam. So it seems that Davide has more control of this game than last time, but now that we have Tornadus on the field comfortably, we can now see a situation where it does what it did earlier in Game 1 and just go for Tailwind and allow one of these super powerful Pokemon to do its justice and just get loads and loads of damage off.
I think the one saving grace for Davide's side of the field is that there's only one Tailwind that's going to go up now, probably, because this Tornadus is a lot lower as it's going for this Tailwind now, so there's a bit more risk to timing when that happens, rather than being able to take 4 turns of Landorus attacking and then 4 turns of Urshifu attacking, like we saw in the previous game. Definitely the situation is a little bit tough with that Landorus hitting the field, as you've mentioned, though. I think that the options from Davide into a Poison type are a lot more limited than the options into most other types of attackers that Devon has, and with this Flutter main locked into Dazzling Gleam, there's just such a safe Terastallization here for this turn to be able to get off a really powerful Sludge Bomb, just like we saw last game.
Yeah, a super duper safe Terastallization, especially with the Pokemon that are in front of you. You get the super strong Sludge Bombs off, but you also get that defensive pivot away from being weak to water type attacks, as well as taking grass type attacks, a little bit better, as well as those fairy type attacks. With Sludge Bomb going to that Ogerpon who hasn't Terastallized and still has that grass typing, is going to drop to that Sludge Bomb. And pending what, and the Flutter main we know has to go for this Dazzling Gleam, because it is choice locked, means it's going to do very, very little damage into this newly poisoned type Landorus.
Yeah, I think Landorus is in perfect position here against a Flutter Mane that continues to be locked into a Fairy type attack. The one cost is that Urshifu now cannot Terrastalize out of its Fairy weakness because Landorus took the Terrastalization. So if there's some world where this Flutter Mane is able to get off an attack, that might be able to finish the Urshifu. But in the meantime, Davide has some tools here, but he's going to have to find a way through 3 turns of Tailwind where there's just a lot of pressure from Devon's side of the field.
There is a lot of pressure being exerted from Devon, and it's a complete change of pace from these earlier turns, because it just shows that change up that can happen and how Hyper Offense can work. And as we both discussed earlier on, it's one of those teams where your defense can be your best offense and your offense can be your best defense, because if something drops, then a new, fresh, super strong Pokemon comes in from the back. Of course, there is a bit of that fear factor where there is now the possibility of a fake out coming out, and Flutter Mane doing a lot of damage into both these Pokemon, even that poison typing reducing some damage. There still is that pressure coming out. You see a Terrastalization does come from Davide's side, which does go onto that Iron Hands, but will take some hits a bit better from these ground type attacks should they come out from the Landorus. But I think right now the pressure is just being exerted down onto this Flutter Mane, because to get rid of that, you can't really do any justice with that Iron Hands there.
So Surging Strike's going to come out. It's going to be really important whether or not this gets the KO on Flutter Mane, and it looks like it is, which is going to really dramatically reduce the options from Davide's side of the field. Davide did a great job of stopping the Landorus from attacking, but that incredible read from Devon's side of the field to trust that there wouldn't be a fake out into the Urshifu and go for that attack anyways in this turn really puts Devon ahead and might be able to win him this second game. Things are looking fairly dire for Davide, although the Water type Iron Hands definitely gives him some options.
Yeah, the Water type Iron Hands does put a lot of pressure down and does open up the options. Of course, you can still Sludge Bomb Earth Power into that, still be doing loads of damage. And with the Tailwind up, you know that the Urshifu is going to be outspeeding that Landorus, even though it's holding that Choice Scarf. So you can quite comfortably know that Landorus is going to be gone, it's being dealt with, and then you can just focus on the Iron Hands later. And with Earth Power doing a big chunk of damage, you know that you can probably make that a non-issue later down the line. Landorus does just drop to 2 Surging Strikes there. And now you're in this position where you're pretty much forced to Wild Charge or try and get damage off into one of these Pokemon. Try and get your HP back if you're Drain Punching, as it's that Drain Punch. But because of that pressure, you aren't getting the big Wild Charge damage off, and now you have 2 Pokemon that can hit super strong attacks into his Iron Hands now.
It feels like the Drain Punch was almost forced because that Iron Hands would have been too low on hit points otherwise. But at the same time, it's really unfortunate that he had to go for that Drain Punch, because that Urshifu having another chance to go for the close combat also might just lock up this game for Devon. It's really a tough position for Iron Hands. I loved the defensive Terrastalization with the Water type, but it's maybe not enough to just have an Iron Hands with the right typing to finish off this game. As we see Earth Power taking Iron Hands down to half hit points, post combat might just it does not finish it off, but even after Drain Punch, I think this Iron Hands is going to be in a pretty dire position.
It is going to be in a pretty sticky situation. It doesn't even go for that Drain Punch, maybe relying on some sort of Detect to try and cause any sort of Wild Charges or further Drain Punches. But it's just a situation where Davide, I think, just knew that they had to go for anything, and it could be curtains, maybe just trying to run calcs through in their mind mentally. But of course, you can never do that against Hyper Offense, because Hyper Offense players will know that if it doesn't knock out on the first turn, it's going to knock out on the second. If it doesn't knock out there, then you have a good old chance that something else is going to follow it up with an attack. And of course, that is what we see here. There's attack after attack after attack, and Iron Hands, as strong as it is, wasn't hitting as hard as it wanted to be into these perfectly tuned super offensive Pokemon.